Hiber-Nation 54. Grizzly's Growls presents Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Read by David Grizzly Smith. Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton, as read by David Grizzly Smith. The Springfield Fox Part One. The hens had been mysteriously disappearing for over a month, and when I came home to Springfield for the summer holidays, it was my duty to find the cause. This was soon done. The fowls were carried away bodily one at a time before going to roost or else after leaving, which put tramps and neighbors out of court. They were not taken from the high perches, which cleared all the coons and owls, or left partly eaten, so that weasels, skunks, or minks were not the guilty ones, and the blame, therefore, was surely left at Renard's door. The great pine wood of Arundel was on the other bank of the river, and on looking carefully about the lower ford, I saw a few fox tracks and a barred feather from one of our Plymouth Rock chickens. On climbing the farther bank in search of more news, I heard a great outcry of crows behind me, and, turning, saw a number of those birds darting down at something in the ford. Better view showed it was the old story, thief catch thief, for there, in the middle of the ford, was a fox with something in his jaws. He was returning from our barnyard with another hen. The crows, though shameless robbers themselves, are ever the first to cry, "Stop, thief," and yet more than ready to take hush money in the form of a share in the plunder. And this was their game now. The fox, to get back home, must cross the river, where he was exposed to the full brunt of the crow mob. He made a dash for it, and would doubtless have gotten across with his booty had I not joined in the attack, whereupon he dropped the hen, scarce dead, and disappeared in the woods. This large and regular levy of provisions, wholly carried off, could mean but one thing: a family of little foxes at home, and to find them I was now bound. That evening I went with Ranger, my hound, across the river into the Arundel woods. As soon as the hound began to circle, we heard the short, sharp bark of a fox from a thickly wooded ravine close by. Ranger dashed in at once, struck a hot scent, and went off on a lively straightaway till his voice was lost in the distance, away over the upland. After nearly an hour he came back, panting and warm, for it was baking August weather, and lay down at my feet. But almost immediately the same foxy yap-yur was heard close at hand, and off dashed the dog on another chase. Away he went in darkness, baying like a foghorn, straight away to the north, and a loud boo-boo became a loud woo-woo, and then a feeble woo, and then was lost. They must have gone some miles away, for even with ear to the ground I heard nothing of them, though a mile was easy distance for Ranger's brazen voice. As I waited in the black woods, I heard a sweet sound of dripping water. Tink, tank, tink, tank, tink, tank, tank, tonk. I did not know of any spring so near, and in the hot night it was a glad find. But the sound led me to the bough of an oak tree, where I found its source. Such a soft, sweet song, full of delightful suggestion on such a night. Tonk, tank, tink, tink, ta-tink, ta-tonk, a-tank, a-tink, ta-tink, tank, ta-ta-tonk, tink, drink, a-tank, a-drink, a-drink, a-drunk. It was the water-dripping song of the saw-whet owl. But suddenly, a deep, raucous breathing and a rustle of leaves showed that Ranger was back. He was completely fagged out. His tongue hung almost to the ground and was dripping with foam. His flanks were heaving, and spume flecks dribbled from his breast and sides. He stopped panting a moment to give my hand a dutiful lick, and then flung himself flop on the leaves to drown all other sounds with his noisy panting. But again, that tantalizing yap-yer was heard a few feet away, and the meaning of it all dawned on me. We were close to the den where the little foxes were, and the old ones were taking turns in trying to lead us away. It was late night now, so we went home feeling sure that the problem was nearly solved. Part 2. It was well known that there was an old fox with his family living in the neighborhood, but no one supposed them so near. This fox had been called Scarface because of a scar reaching from his eye through and back of his ear. This was supposed to have been given him by a barbed wire fence during a rabbit hunt, and as the hair came in white after it healed, it was always a strong mark. The winter before, I had met with him and had had a sample of his craftiness. I was out shooting after a fall of snow, and had crossed the open fields to the edge of the brushy hollow back of the old mill. As my head rose to a view of the hollow, I caught sight of a fox trotting at long range down the other side, in line to cross my course. Instantly, I held motionless, and did not even lower or turn my head, lest I should catch his eye by moving, until he went on down to sight into the thick cover at the bottom. Well, as soon as he was hidden, I bobbed down and ran to head him off where he should leave the cover on the other side, and was there in good time awaiting, but no fox came forth. A careful look showed the fresh track of a fox that had bounded from the cover, and following it with my eye, I saw old Scarface himself far out of range behind me, sitting on his haunches and grinning as though amused. A study of the trail made all clear. He had seen me at the moment I saw him, but he, also like a true hunter, had concealed the fact, putting on an air of unconcern till out of sight, when he had run for his life around behind me and amused himself by watching my stillborn trick. In the springtime I had yet another instance of Scarface's cunning. I was walking with a friend along the road over the high pasture. We passed within 30 feet of a ridge on which were several gray and brown boulders, when at the nearest point my friend said, "Stone number 3 looks to me very much like a fox curled up." But I could not see it, and we passed. We had not gone many yards farther when the wind blew on this boulder as on fur. My friend said, "I'm sure that is a fox lying asleep." "We'll soon settle that," I replied, and turned back, but soon as I had taken one step from the road, up jumped Scarface, for it was he, and ran. A fire had swept the middle of the pasture, leaving a broad belt of black, and over this he scurried till he came to the unburnt yellow grass again, where he squatted down and was lost to view. He had been watching us all the time, and would not have moved had we kept to the road. The wonderful part of this is, not that he resembled the round stones and dry grass, but that he knew he did, and was ready to profit by it. Well, we soon found that it was Scarface and his wife Vixen that had made our woods their home, and our barnyard their base of supplies. Next morning, a search in the pines showed a great bank of earth that had been scratched up within a few months. It must have come from a hole, and yet there was none to be seen. It is well known that a really cute fox, on digging a new den, brings all the earth out at the first hole made, but carries on a tunnel into some distant thicket, then closing up for good the first made and too well-marked door, uses only the entrance hidden in the thicket. So, after a little search at the other side of a knoll, I found the real entry, and good proof there was a nest of little foxes inside. Rising above the brush on the hillside was a great hollow basswood. It leaned a good deal and had a large hole at the bottom and a smaller one at the top. We boys had often used this tree in playing Swiss Family Robinson, and by cutting steps in its soft, punky walls had made it easy to go up and down in the hollow. Now it came in handy, for next day, when the sun was warm, I went there to watch. And from this perch on the roof, I soon saw the interesting family that lived in the cellar nearby. There were 4 little foxes. They looked curiously like little lambs, with their woolly coats, their long, thick legs, and innocent expressions, and yet a second glance at their broad, sharp-nosed, sharp-eyed visages showed that each of these innocents was the makings of a crafty old fox. They played about, basking in the sun, or wrestling with each other, till a slight sound made them scurry underground. But their alarm was needless, for the cause of it was their mother. She stepped from the bushes, bringing another hen. Number 17, as I remember. A low call from her, and the little fellows came tumbling out. Then began a scene that I thought charming, but which my uncle would not have enjoyed at all. They rushed on the hen, and tussled and fought with it, and each other, while the mother, keeping a sharp eye for enemies, looked on with fond delight. The expression on her face was remarkable. It was first a grinning of delight, but her usual look of wildness and cunning was there, nor were cruelty and nervousness lacking, but over all was the unmistakable look of the mother's pride and love. Well, the base of my tree was hidden in bushes, and much lower than the knoll where the den was, so I could come and go at will without scaring the foxes. For many days I went there and saw much of the training of the young ones. They early learned to turn to statuettes at a sound, and then on hearing it again, or finding other cause for fear, to run for shelter. Some animals have so much mother love that it overflows and benefits outsiders. Not so old Vixen, it would seem. Her pleasure in the cubs led to the most refined cruelty, for she often brought home to them mice and birds, alive, and with diabolic gentleness would avoid doing them serious hurt, so that the cubs might have larger scope to torment them. There was a woodchuck that lived over in the hill orchard. He was neither handsome nor interesting, but he knew how to take care of himself. He had dug a den between the roots of an old pine stump so that the foxes could not follow him by digging. But hard work was not their way of life. Wits, they believed, worth more than elbow grease. This woodchuck usually sunned himself on the stump each morning. If he saw a fox near, he went down in the door of his den, or if the enemy was very near, he went inside and stayed long enough for the danger to pass. One morning, Vixen and her mate seemed to decide that it was time the children knew something about the broad subject of woodchucks, and further that this orchard woodchuck would serve nicely for an object lesson. So they went together to the orchard fence, unseen by old Chucky on his stump. Scarface then showed himself in the orchard and quietly walked in a line so as to pass the stump at a distance, but never once turned his head or allowed the ever-watchful woodchuck to think himself seen. When the fox entered the field, the woodchuck quietly dropped down to the mouth of his den. Here he waited as the fox passed, but, concluding that after all wisdom is the better part, went into his hole. This is what the foxes wanted. Vixen had kept out of sight, but now ran swiftly to the stump and hid behind it. Scarface kept straight on, going very slowly. The woodchuck had not been frightened, so before long his head popped up between the roots and he looked around. There was that fox still going on, farther and farther away. The woodchuck grew bold as the fox went, came out farther, and then, seeing the coast clear, he scrambled onto the stump. And with one spring, Vixen had him and shook him till he lay senseless. Scarface had watched out of the corner of his eye and now came running back, but Vixen took the chuck in her jaws and made for the den, so he saw he wasn't needed. Back to the den came Vix, and carried the chuck so carefully that he was able to struggle a little when she got there. A low woof at the den brought the little fellows out like schoolboys to play. She threw the wounded animal to them, and they set on him like 4 little furies, uttering little growls and biting little bites with all the strength of their baby jaws. But the woodchuck fought for his life, and beating them off, slowly hobbled to the shelter of a thicket. The little ones pursued like a pack of hounds, and dragged at his tail and flanks, but could not hold him back. So Vixen overtook him with a couple of bounds, and dragged him again into the open for the children to worry. Again and again this rough sport went on, till one of the little ones was badly bitten, and his squeal of pain roused Vix to end the woodchuck's misery and serve him up at once. Not far from the den was a hollow overgrown with coarse grass, the playground of a colony of field mice. The earliest lesson in woodcraft that the little ones took, away from the den, was in this hollow. Here they had their first course of mice, the easiest of all game. In teaching, the main thing was example, aided by a deep-set instinct. The old fox also had 1 or 2 signs meaning, lie still and watch, come, do as I do, and so on, that were much used. So the merry lot went to this hollow one calm evening, and Mother made them lie still in the grass. Presently a faint squeak showed that the game was astir. Vix rose up and went on tiptoe into the grass, not crouching, but as high as she could stand, sometimes on her hind legs so as to get a better view. The runs that the mice follow are hidden under the grass tangle, and the only way to know the whereabouts of a mouse is by seeing the slight shaking of the grass, which is the reason why mice are hunted only on calm days. And the trick is to locate the mouse and seize him first and see him afterward. Well, Vix soon made a spring, and in the middle of the bunch of dead grass that she grabbed was a field mouse, squeaking his last squeak. He was soon gobbled, and the 4 awkward little foxes tried to do the same as their mother, and when at length the eldest, for the first time in his life, caught game, he quivered with excitement and ground his pearly little milk teeth into the mouse with a rush of inborn savageness that must have surprised even himself. Another home lesson was on the Red Squirrel. One of these noisy, vulgar creatures lived close by, and used to waste part of each day scolding the foxes from some safe perch. The cubs made many vain attempts to catch him as he ran across their glade from one tree to another, or spluttered and scolded at them a foot or so out of reach. But old Vixen was up in natural history. She knew squirrel nature, and took the case in hand when the proper time came. She hid the children, and lay down flat in the middle of the open glade. The saucy, low-minded squirrel came and scolded as usual, but she moved no hair. He came nearer, and at last right overhead to chatter, "You brute you, you brute you." But the Vix lay as dead. Well, this was very perplexing, so the squirrel came down the trunk, and peeping about, made a nervous dash across the grass to another tree, again to scold from a safe perch. "You brute you, you useless brute, scar, scar." But flat and lifeless on the grass lay Vix. This was most tantalizing to the squirrel. He was naturally curious and disposed to be venturesome, so again he came to the ground and scurried across the glade nearer than before. Still as death lay Vix. Surely she was dead. And little foxes began to wonder if their mother wasn't asleep. But the squirrel was working himself into a little craze of foolhardy curiosity. He dropped a piece of bark on Vix's head. He'd used up his list of bad words and done it all over again without getting a sign of life. So, after a couple more dashes across the glade, he ventured within a few feet of the really watchful Vix, who sprang to her feet and pinned him in a twinkling. And the little one picked the bones, oh. Thus the rudiments of their education were laid, and afterward, as they grew stronger, they were taken farther afield to begin the higher branches of trailing and scenting. For each kind of prey they were taught a way to hunt, for each animal has some great strength or it could not live, and some great weakness or the others could not live. The squirrel's weakness was foolish curiosity, the fox's that he can't climb a tree, and the training of the little foxes was all shaped to take advantage of the weakness of the other creatures and to make up for their own by defter play where they are strong. From their parents, they learned the chief axioms of the fox world. How is not easy to say, but that they learned this in company with their parents was clear. Here are some that the foxes taught me without saying a word. Never sleep on your straight track. Your nose is before your eyes, then trust it first. A fool runs down the wind. Running rills cure many ills. Never take to the open if you can keep the cover. Never leave a straight trail if a crooked one will do. If it's strange, it's hostile. Dust and water burn the scent. Never hunt mice in a rabbit woods or rabbits in a hen yard. Keep off the grass. Inklings of the meanings of these were already entering the little ones' minds. Thus, never follow what you can't smell was wise, they could see, because if you can't smell it, then the wind is so that it must smell you. One by one, they learned the birds and the beasts of their home woods, and then, as they were able to go abroad with their parents, they learned new animals. They were beginning to think they knew the scent of everything that moved. But one night, the mother took them to a field where there was a strange black flat thing on the ground. She brought them on purpose to smell it, but at the first whiff their every hair stood on end. They trembled. They knew not why. It seemed to tingle through their blood and fill them with instinctive hate and fear. And when she saw its full effect, she told them, "That is man's scent." Thank you for listening to Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Comment on the website at grizzliesgrowls.com. This program is offered under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.